So, hello there, and welcome back to yet another Night of the Movies podcast. And in these podcasts, I talk all things movies and TV, and whatever I want, whenever I want. And in today's podcast, and I'm very excited about this, in today's podcast, I give my thoughts on Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. But just before I do that, I should say what it is out of every podcast I do, which is, if you are watching this podcast on YouTube, hello to my viewers, but you prefer to listen to your podcast on Spotify, well, you're in luck, as you can also listen to this podcast on Spotify at Night of the Movies on that platform. And if you are already listening to this podcast on Spotify, hello there to podcast listeners, then you can also check the podcast out visually on my YouTube channel at Night of the Movies on that platform as well. Likewise, wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the podcast, of course, and leave me with some feedback on things to improve on in future podcasts, because there's always things to improve on, and feedback is, as ever, much appreciated. Also, I should say today that I'm feeling a bit under the weather. I'm still feeling quite dizzy like I was in my Five Nights at Freddy's review that I did a couple of days ago. Check that out if you haven't already, by the way. I get quite annoyed talking about that film, but yeah, I'm still feeling a bit unwell, so I don't know how this podcast is going to turn out, but I'm going to push through no matter what, because this is a film I want to talk about. I'm very excited to talk about this film, and that is, of course, Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. So, let's go back to the beginning, shall we? Let's go back to where Wallace and Gromit began with A Grand Day Out in 1989, which was created and directed by Nick Park, and the Wallace and Gromit adventures continued after A Grand Day Out with Wallace and Gromit The Wrong Trousers, then into Wallace and Gromit A Close Shave, and then most recently Wallace and Gromit A Matter of Loaf and Death. But they were short films, and still to today, Wallace and Gromit The Curse of the Were-Rabbit is the only full-length feature Wallace and Gromit film. And I'm not even going to try and hide my opinion on this one. I absolutely adore this film. I love it to pieces. It's one of my favourite films of all time, and I think it's absolutely perfect. Because really, when you think about this film, can you think of anything wrong with it? I know I can't. And the thing is, right, let's go back and do some context. The film was released in 2005, and it's co-directed by Nick Park, who is the person behind Wallace and Gromit, and Steve Box, who I must admit I'm not really familiar with. And it comes with a story by Nick Park and a script written by Steve Box, Mark Booton, Bob Baker, and Nick Park himself. So you can see there that Nick Park is spearheading the project. It is still very much him. He's a person who came to Wallace and Gromit, and he was still very much involved in this film. And you can feel that, by the way. You can clearly tell this is a person. The film is made by somebody who loves these characters and has so much investment into these characters. And the film follows the story of, you've guessed it already, Wallace and Gromit, who are at the heart and centre of the film. Their relationship, as with all the Wallace and Gromit films, is at the centre of the film. And Wallace and Gromit in this film, in their only full-length feature film to date, get caught up in trying to find a were-rabbit that is terrorising the town where the film takes place, as a vegetable competition is on the horizon. However, it is soon revealed that Wallace is in fact the were-rabbit, and then things get complicated. And that's my version of the plot for Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. And as I already said, I just think this film is absolutely perfect. I adore it so much, and I'm getting so excited just thinking about it and thinking about how much I love this film. And I mean, most of this podcast today is just going to be me talking about how much I adore this film and how I think it is perfect and how incredible it actually is, and how it is a masterpiece as well. You know, loads of people throw around that phrase nowadays. This film is a masterpiece, you know, especially happens with big blockbusters which end up being good. Not great, but good. When a big blockbuster that people have been excited for, when a big blockbuster turns out to be good nowadays, people immediately go, that was a masterpiece, when actually, it was okay, it was watchable, but it wasn't a masterpiece. The word masterpiece, in my opinion, is thrown around way too much nowadays. But I genuinely think, and I'm going to go into why in this podcast today, I genuinely think that Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, is a masterpiece. I mean, first of all, who doesn't love Wallace and Gromit? I grew up watching their films ever since, watching the Wallace and Gromit films ever since I can remember. And I remember watching Curse of the Were-Rabbit at a very young age and being obsessed with the film ever since I saw it. And I still am now. I still watch this film at least twice a year. Often more. Just before I did this podcast today, I stuck on the film to make notes for the podcast. And I was planning to only watch like half an hour of the film. I ended up watching the entire film. Because it's so tiny, it's so to the point, it just keeps moving. And one of the biggest reasons I adore the film is the characters of Wallace and Gromit. Whenever you watch them on their adventures in any of the films, not only Curse of the Were-Rabbit, but also A Grand Day Out, A Close Shave, The Wrong Trousers, A Matter of Loaf and Death, which I think is very much underrated, by the way. I don't hear nearly enough people talk about A Matter of Loaf and Death, and I revisited that the other week. It is fantastic. It filled me with so much joy. But the thing that I always love about those films is the relation between Wallace and Gromit. Because really those films, all the Wallace and Gromit films, including Curse of the Were-Rabbit, are stories about a man on an adventure with his dog. And usually when that's pitched, the man is always smarter than the dog. In these instances, and if you've seen the Wallace and Gromit films, you'll know what I'm about to say, the dog is smarter than the human. The dog is smarter than the man. Wallace is the one always getting into trouble, and Gromit is the one who has to save Wallace. And that happens in this film, and just watching that relationship play out in all the Wallace and Gromit films, and especially in Curse of the Were-Rabbit, is just absolutely wonderful. And it's done so well. Their relationship in all the Wallace and Gromit films, and again, especially in Curse of the Were-Rabbit, is at the centre of all these films. And you really feel that. It's the heart of the films, and the way that it's done, it's just so good, and it works perfectly here, because Gromit is the one that saves the day. Because one of the reasons I absolutely adore this film, and it's a spoiler, I've already given away this spoiler anyway, but one of the reasons I absolutely love this film is because Wallace is the protagonist. He's the hero of the story. But he's also the villain. He's also the Were-Rabbit. And that's genius, that twist. It didn't sink in how genius that twist was until quite a few years later, after watching the film for the first time. It was only quite a few years ago when that twist sinked in. Oh my god, that is brilliant. And I still think that twist is fantastic now, because you both do see it coming, but you also don't. The film tries to mislead you in trying to get you to think that Huch is going to be the Were-Rabbit, but then it turned out to be Wallace. And I remember when I was a kid and I first watched that, I was shocked when that scene happened. And now I love the way the twist is done, because a part of me still doesn't think it's going to happen, but then it does. And I think it's such a genius twist, and Gromit is the one that saves the day. And on the topic of previous Wallace and Gromit films, which I just briefly discussed, this film I do think is a culmination of all the Wallace and Gromit films, including A Matter of Loaf and Death, which was released 3 years after this film was initially released. A Matter of Loaf and Death, although it came after this film, has a lot of things which are evoked because of this film, though. If you get what I mean, it has a lot of big similarities. For example, Gromit has a counterpart in Curse of the Were-Rabbit. He has Victor's dog. I forgot the dog's called now, but that dog who you think is bad on the surface, but then it's revealed throughout the film that he's just with the wrong owner. You know what I mean? There's that scene, there's that moment in the dogfight sequence towards the end of Curse of the Were-Rabbit where he gets his little purse out to get the coin so that the dogfight keeps on going. And it's a little joke. It plays the joke, but it adds so much more to that character. And, in this film, in Curse of the Were-Rabbit, Gromit has a counterpart that he has to face off against. And then, in A Matter of Loaf and Death, to add a trying to think what I can't think what I'm trying to say right now. To add another side of the sword, if you know what I mean, to add another side to that, in A Matter of Loaf and Death, he has a female counterpart that ends up being a bit of a love interest for him in that film. And I love the way that that's done. You know, I don't think the love interest in A Matter of Loaf and Death would be as effective as if it wasn't for the relationship between Gromit and Victor's dog in Curse of the Were-Rabbit. And it also evokes the previous Wallace and Gromit short films that came before. And I say short films, by the way, they are 40 minutes long, but, you know, they are short films still. And in this film, there's a sequence in Curse of the Were-Rabbit, there's a sequence where you see Gromit, you know, putting together a cage for Huch. When him and Wallace first discover Huch, they put him in a wooden cage. And there's a montage sequence which is really well done, by the way. It's some great Julian Knott music. You know, Julian Knott, who is the composer of the film. There's some great music played as a montage sequence plays of Gromit putting together a cage for Huch. And it's very similar to the montage sequence that plays when you see Wallace putting together the rocket and A Grand Day Out. It evokes that first Wallace and Gromit film. Then you get into the second Wallace and Gromit film, The Wrong Trouser, which is still my favourite to date, by the way. I think the best Wallace and Gromit thing to come out, by the way, I don't know if I said this already, I'm not sure because my head's spinning already, is The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. But I think the best short, though, is The Wrong Trousers. I think The Wrong Trousers is absolutely genius because the only character that speaks in that film is Wallace, and the villain is Feathers McGraw, and he doesn't say a single word, but he's threatening every single time he's on screen. Love that villain to pieces. In fact, I've even got my calendar back there, you know, for this month. Anyway, yeah, in The Wrong Trousers, you have Wallace being controlled by the wrong trousers, which are completely out of his control. You know, he can't control them, and he ends up doing that heist to get the diamond, from what I remember. And in this film, it's out of control when Wallace becomes the Were-Rabbit. He becomes a Were-Rabbit and it's out of control, and again, it evokes The Wrong Trousers. The film also evokes A Close Shave. Remember in A Close Shave, you get the scene where Sean goes through the wool maker, and it's done in quite a scary fashion. I remember watching and thinking, God, what's going to happen to Shaun the Sheep in this sequence? And then he just turns out he's got less wool. You know, he comes out of the machine, he's got less wool than he did beforehand. And in this film, you see that one rabbit go through the machine that Wallace and Gromit have created as he gets mixed up in the head thing that Wallace is wearing. If you've seen the film, hopefully you know what I mean. I'm not sure if I explained myself too well. But again, it's evoking A Close Shave. And there's plenty of other instances like that in the film. There are plenty of other instances like that in Curse of the Were-Rabbit that evoke the other Wallace and Gromit films. Even A Matter of Loaf and Death, which came out after this film came out. And, it came out 3 years after Curse of the Were-Rabbit, and I love that even that evokes some of this film, and vice versa. And so, yeah, I think that Curse of the Were-Rabbit is the culmination, is a perfect culmination of all of the Wallace and Gromit films to date. And I also love how it opens. This film, in my opinion, has one of the best openings of all time. It just simply does. For me, it's up there with the opening to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, when you see young Indy on the train, and it's up there with the opening to Magnolia, the Paul Thomas Anderson film, which is one of my favourite films of all time, and it's up there with the opening to Empire Strikes Back, which is another one of my favourite films of all time. You get the point I'm making. You can see why it's one of my favourite films of all time, because I think the opening is brilliant. The film starts off with the classic Wallace and Gromit music, you know. Oh, I forgot it then. You have that playing in the background, a fantastic orchestral version of that piece of music, and you see all these pictures of young Wallace and Gromit throughout the years. Well, not just young Wallace and Gromit. You see all these pictures of Wallace and Gromit throughout the years, and I love how that is how they provide you a bit of backstory, because you see Gromit when he was a puppy, and you see Wallace with a beard and long hair, and then as the camera tracks around all these pictures, you see them grow up throughout the years, and you, just like that, you understand the bond between those two characters. There's no dialogue, there's no narration or anything like that. All you have is that whole, all you have is show don't tell. It's that whole thing, show don't tell. Don't tell your audience why these two are so close. Show them, and that's what they do through the photos. And even now, when I watch the film at a much older age than when I first watched it, and I see that photo of Gromit as a puppet and young Wallace, my heart just melts. It instantly melts. And not many films manage to do that in their opening. I mean, literally, it's in the first 30 seconds of the film. It might be before the first 30 seconds. It's right at the start of the film, and my heart just melts. It's one frame that I just think is brilliant. And then, as the scene progresses, and you get the opening title, Curse of the Were-Rabbit, and you see the ears of the were-rabbit come out of the W on the title. You see the police officer wandering about in the streets of this town where the film takes place, and the police officer, by the way, is voiced by Peter Kay, a comedian which I love to pieces. I'm seeing him next year, actually, live, which I'm really looking forward to. Yeah, you see the police officer voiced by Peter Kay just wandering about in the streets, and then it cuts to the Thunderbirds-like opening with Wallace and Gromit, with the eyes flashing on the portrait, and then you get the bump bump, you get the music starting, and it becomes very much like Thunderbirds. You see Wallace and Gromit literally are tipped out of their bed and into this machine and then to the car, and the whole opening is so good and perfectly gets you into the film just like that. It gets you engaged instantly into the film, and you're right there with it. I mean, it's like, again, it's a combination of all the Wallace and Gromit stuff, because that happens in A Close Shave. It happens in A Matter of Life and Death again. That sort of opening where it's like, it's very Thunderbirds-like, and it happens there, and I think this is the best way it happens, that whole opening with Wallace and Gromit getting ready. It's only like a 30-second sequence, but I think it works so good, so well, and getting you engaged in the film, and making you smile instantly, and just getting you prepared for the absolute treat of a ride you're about to experience. And then you see Wallace and Gromit capturing the first rabbit that you see in the film, and you think it's going to turn out to be this quite big rabbit because of the name of the film, the Were-Rabbit. It actually just turns out to be this small rabbit who's making a bit of a fuss trying to get this pumpkin so it can eat it for itself. And I love the way that's done though, and the way the rabbits look in this film. My brother said this to me after we both saw Chicken Run 2, Dawn of the Nugget, not too long ago. There's something about the way that Aardman animals look that is just so undeniably lovable. And it's the truth. The way the Aardman animals look in all their films, whether it's Chicken Run, well, not even just the films, Creature Comforts, that's a lot of where Aardman came from. I think Wallace and Gromit came before that, if I remember correctly. I must admit, I'm not too familiar with Creature Comforts, although I have seen it, I just don't remember it too well. The way the animals looked in that, though, the way Gromit looks in the Wallace and Gromit films, the way the chickens look in Chicken Run, both in the first Chicken Run and in Chicken Run Dawn of the Nugget, which, as I've already mentioned, I have already seen, and I think is absolutely fantastic, by the way. Go and check out my review of Chicken Run Dawn of the Nugget if you haven't already. Oh, it's a good film, that. It was really, really good. And the way they look in Early Man, what's that? What's the animal called in Early Man? Is it Hognob? I think it's called Hognob, and I really like the way that animal looked. And in The Pirates in an Adventure with Scientists, you get the dodo, and that just looks lovable. All the characters in Aardman films just look instantly cute and adorable and lovable and all that sort of stuff. And that's the same with the rabbits in this film. And then when you see what Wallace and Gromit do to these rabbits, the way they keep them, it's just perfect. And it's so funny at the same time, because you see Gromit feeding all these rabbits with carrots that he's been cutting up. And then you realise that all the rabbits been hiding in this kitchen where Gromit has been cutting all the carrots, and they're hiding in the fridge, they're hiding in the in the bread compartment. You get what I mean? It's so funny, and the visual gags just make you laugh. And it's so good, and it's so funny. You know, as already mentioned, you can see how worked I'm again about this film because I just love it so much, and I got so much to say about it. Ooh, I'm gonna calm down because this film just gets me so excited, makes me so happy, and I'm not sure how much sense I'm making when I talk about it because, oh God, I love the way that the visual gags are done in the film because a lot of the comedy in the film isn't through the dialogue. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's some very funny lines in the film, definitely. Like, when you get all the townspeople, where the film takes place, where they go to the church. You know, the townspeople go to the church and they're trying to figure out how to capture the were-rabbit. And the were-rabbit's always built up as this horrible monster that's going to kill us all, when actually it's just Wallace and he wants to eat all the vegetables in this town, which is genius. But you get all the townspeople who go to the church and they're trying to decide how to capture the were-rabbit. And they ask Wallace, and he just goes, "With a big trap." And it's brilliant. It's so funny because everybody cheers after he says that, and it's not really an explanation of how he's going to capture the were-rabbit. Even in that moment, Gromit slaps his hand in his head, and you feel like Gromit in that scene because it's such an idiotic answer to that question, and yet everybody, all the townspeople in this church cheer, and like, it's a brilliant idea, he's got it. And that line is so funny, you know, with a big trap. But what I was I can't speak. What I was saying before, going back into what I was saying before, the film also has a lot of visual gags and a lot of things in the background which are really funny. Like early on in the film, I'm going to jump around a bit here. Early on in the film, when you see Gromit looking after his marrow, his prized marrow that he's entering into the vegetable competition, in the background it says it has a vinyl of the plant suite. And if people don't know, the Planet Suite is very famous. It's a very famous piece of music, a really good piece of music as well. And it's playing off that because it's a film revolves around vegetables, and vegetables grow off plants. You know, you get the point I'm making. And in the background of this one moment, you see Gromit looking after his prized marrow that is entering into the vegetable competition. You have the plant suite in the background, and then later on, when Victor, and I'll get onto Victor very shortly in this podcast, when you see Victor go to the priest and he's talking about the were-rabbit and the origin of the were-rabbit. The priest gone about the origin of the were-rabbit. Ever since the dawn of time, people have been afraid of the were-rabbit. He's flicking through his book and you see Bigfoot, and it's just a man with a huge foot. It's brilliant, and it's so funny, and it's just these small visual gags that are sort of blink if you miss it gags, but they work so well. And that's something that Aardman does in all their films. It's not just Wallace and Gromit, although it happens to be Wallace and Gromit a lot, but they did it in Chicken Run as well. And they also, what was the other film I remember watching not too long ago? And it was another Aardman film where they did it, and I think it might have been The Pirates and Adventure with Scientists, where there's all these just small visual gags that are so funny and are not done through dialogue, and there's so many instances of that in this film. And I mean, I just love how imaginative and creative the film as well. It's a very creative film that evokes not only the other Wallace and Gromit films, but it also evokes many famous classics, like it evokes Jaws at one stage, and a bit of Tremors, you know, the film that stars Kevin Bacon. I haven't seen that in a very long time, by the way. Maybe I'll watch that tonight. Seeing as it's Halloween right now. One thing I already mentioned it, I'm recording this on Halloween. But anyway, yes. The film evokes Jaws and Tremors when you see the were-rabbit under the ground. There's a bit of Jaws and a bit of Tremors. And the film also evokes those Hammer horror films from, what was it, the 1950s, a bit in the 1960s. It evokes the Hammer horror films through the way it's shot. It evokes many horror films through the way it looks. And that's another reason it's so good, because of the way it is shot. It looks like a horror film, and I'll get onto that in more detail very shortly in this podcast. And then towards the end of the film, it begins to evoke King Kong when you see the were-rabbit pick up Lady Tottingham and he climbs to the top of her estate. It's evoking King Kong. It's evoking King Kong with the way it's done, and the plane that is flying around the were-rabbit. There's all these different classics that Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-rabbit evokes, but it's very much its own thing. It's still very much its own entity. Even though it's evoking all these classics and paying homage to all these classics, it's still its own thing though. It doesn't feel like a copy of any of those films. And that's another reason I love it so much. It's just so different than anything I've ever seen. You know, that's going back onto that whole thing I was saying, how creative and imaginative it is. I have never seen another film like this. I mean this as well, talking about in regard to other Aardman films. I've never seen any other film like this because of how creative and imaginative it is. I can't even speak. Because of how creative and imaginative it is. I got there in the end because how creative and imaginative it is. That 3 times now. You know, there's that whole sequence with the dogfight with the 2 planes from the fun fair, and that sequence is so creative, and all the stuff with the were-rabbit, it's so imaginative. It's so good. I'm gonna say that about 50 million more times in this podcast today, but you understand, I love this film. It's just brilliant. And going back onto the whole horror side of everything in this film, it is evoking a lot of horror films. It does evoke a lot of horror films, and the thing is, the film is slightly scary at times. I mean, when I was much younger, it was much scarier than it is now for me. I don't find the film quite as scary as I did when I first watched it, but it is still scary. You know, in parts, it's still filmed and captured to look like a horror film, and that's another reason I think it's absolutely incredible, because I think the best family adventure films should have a bit of horror in them. I think they should do, and I think this film does have a lot of that. You know, the moment that comes to mind right now when I think about the horror in this film and the way it's shot is when when Gromit first figures out, when he finally figures out that Wallace is in fact the were-rabbit, and he goes into Wallace's bedroom and he sees all these half-eaten vegetables on Wallace's bed. And it's shot to like a horror film now, when in actuality, when I said that out loud, it's not scary whatsoever. Like, there are all these sequences, there's all these sequences in the film where you see Wallace, where you see the were-rabbit, should I say, where you see the were-rabbit eating all these vegetables from people's backyards. And it's not scary. Just when I said it out loud, you know, it's not really a scary idea, yet it's shot to look like the were-rabbit is eating human remains and is doing these really scary things when it's just eating vegetables. And it's genius. Fantastic, that. I love the way it's shot to look like a horror film, and at the same time, I love that the film is exciting though, and it's thrilling, and it's got this joy to it and this wonder that just comes off the screen in the best way possible. And I think there are many huge reasons for that. I think there's many significant reasons for that, but the two that are really, the 2 biggest reasons I think that there is wonder and joy and excitement and thrill and horror all in this film, and even a bit of emotion in there. Yes, I do think this is a bit of a moving film as well. In fact, I don't think it's a bit moving. I think it gets very moving towards the end. When you think Wallace is almost dead. And the reason I think that this film is moving, emotional, exciting, thrilling, and even scary in parts is because you feel the passion coming off the screen when you're watching it. You feel the passion that has gone into making this film. It's that stop motion animation from Aardman Studios, which I've spoken about at length, I think is absolutely mind-blowing. I'm not a patient person, so I can't ever imagine doing stop motion animation like they have in all their films. Well, in almost all their films. After Christmas, which is apparently an Aardman film. I don't think of it as an Aardman film, but that's not stop motion animation. Neither is Flushed Away, and I do think it's to its downfall. I don't think Flushed Away is bad, but I don't think it's as good as it could be because it's not stop motion animation. But when you look at Aardman's other films, whether it's Early Man, Chicken Run, Dawn of the Nugget, which, again, I've already seen and it's fantastic. Whether it's the Shaun the Sheep films, whether it's the other Wallace and Gromit films, and so on and so on and so on, you know, they're all stop motion animation, and you feel the care and passion that's gone into the stop motion animation. You feel that come off the screen, and the animation looks beautiful. I mean, the film still holds up now, even though it's not far off being 20 years old, this film. What is it? Is it 18 years old? Yeah, I suppose it is, because the film first came out in 2005. So this film is almost 20 years old, and yet it still looks great, though. You know, not only in the way it is shot, because it's beautifully shot. This film is beautifully captured, but also through the animation, which still looks great now. And I found out some facts before doing this podcast today. Let's see if we can quickly get the facts up. So according to IMDb, the film required 2.8 tons of plasticine. That's how the models were made, they're plasticine models. The film required 2.8 tons of plasticine in 42 colours and 1,000 baby wipes per week to wipe off the animator's fingers. And the film took 5 years to make. 5 years. I read somewhere, I didn't read this on IMDb, but I know I've got it down here. I must have read it on IMDb actually. The film started production shortly after the release of the first Chicken Run in 2000, and this film was released in 2005. The film took 5 years to make, and as I've said already, 2.8 tons of plasticine in 42 colours and 1,000 baby wipes per week to wipe it off the animator's fingers. And according to Reddit, so I don't know how accurate this is because it is off Reddit, so take this with a grain of salt, but I did want to mention this because I think if this is true, it's quite remarkable as well. Aardman Animations manage an average of 3 seconds of usable film per day in the making of Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. 3 seconds of usable film for this film per day. That is astounding to me. I don't get the motivation you must have when you're making an Aardman film. I applaud Aardman animators so much because the amount of time and blood and sweat and tears and the amount of life you must put into making these films. And Curse of the Were-Rabbit took 5 years to make, and they can only use, again according to Reddit, so do you take it with a grain of salt, but they can only use 3 seconds of usable footage per day. I mean, it blows my mind. You can, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll literally be seeing my mind being blown. I'm astounded by this animation, and you really do feel though the passion from the animators come off the screen in the best way possible. That's one of the reasons I far prefer stop motion animation over normal animation, you know, Pixar, Illumination and all that style animation over. There's one of the reasons I prefer stop motion animation over Pixar animation and Illumination animation and all that stuff, because you feel the passion more, and I think the result is more visually appealing, and I also think the result is more groundbreaking. Like what Aardman have done with their films, and I know they're not the only stop motion animation studio out there, I understand that, but I think they're the best one, and what they've done with their films and how they have developed stop motion animation is just sensational. I think it's absolutely incredible, and I think that The Curse of the Were-Rabbit is the pinnacle of their filmmaking. Shows how masterful and, I mean, phenomenal Aardman Studios can be. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that all of Aardman's films after Curse of the Were-Rabbit were bad. I'm not saying that. I think that all of the Aardman films are fantastic. I made a video about this not too long ago. I think Aardman Studios might be the best film studio working because even the quote-unquote worst of their films are still pretty good. You know, I don't think Early Man is the strongest of the Aardman films. I still think it's a really entertaining watch. And so yeah, I'm not saying that all the Aardman films after Curse of the Were-Rabbit are bad, but I think that Curse of the Were-Rabbit is the best Aardman animation film. I really do think it is. Because it shows you the power of their animation in all the best ways. So yeah, I am astounded by the animation that went into making this film, and you really do feel that, and that's one of the main reasons that I think the film is emotional and is wildly entertaining and is also engaging and funny and exciting and all that jazz. That's one of the reasons that I think it works so well, is because of the animation, and also I think it's because of the musical score. Many people might not care about the musical score when it comes to a Wallace and Gromit film, and I get why, but for me, the music to all the Wallace and Gromit films hold such a special place in my heart. You know, just the other day, in fact, it was only yesterday, I was listening to a piece of music from The Wrong Trousers, and instantly I was taken back to my childhood. Instantly I was taken back to my childhood. It was a piece of music that plays when the Wrong Trousers are just walking about on their own in the street, when Gromit is playing in the park and he's he's put the trousers away, you know, he's taken the trousers away from him and he's just playing about in the park by himself, and the music that plays in the background, you know, bum 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 ba-dum bum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum bum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum bum. Whenever I listen to that piece of music, it's nostalgic and it takes me back to my childhood. And I feel very much the same about the music to Curse of the Were-Rabbit. It's composed by Julian Knott. At least I think it is. You know, Julian Knott did the music to all the Wallace and Gromit films. And I think he did the music to this film. Although if you go on Spotify, he's not the only credit underneath the piece of music. There's loads of other people credited. But as far as I'm aware, it was only Julian Knott that composed music. If anyone has any other information on that, please let me know, because I'd love to hear if other people compose the music, because I think it's a very good score and I want to give the composers the credit. But as far as I know, it's only Julian Knott, so that's who I'm going to give credit to. And I think that Julian Knott's score for Curse of the Were-Rabbit is perfect. It's one of those scores, not too dissimilar than the Lord of the Rings scores, and that's a bit of a weird comparison. You know, Wallace and Gromit, Lord of the Rings. But yeah, not too dissimilar than the Lord of the Rings scores, and also the John Williams scores to Star Wars films, where I can listen to them, and they will instantly take me back to the film. You know, without having to watch the film, I can listen to a piece of music from any of those scores, whether it's Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, the Lord of the Rings films, or any of the original Star Wars films, and I can listen to a piece of music from any of those films, and it will instantly take me back to the film. If you get what I mean? You know, I can listen to the opening theme, what's it called? Antipesto to the Rescue. The opening theme to Curse of the Rabbit, you know. Bum ba dum ba da ba da bum ba da ba da bum ba 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 bum ba bum ba dum ba da ba da bum ba da ba da bum. I can listen to that piece of music and it instantly takes me back to the film, and it makes me smile, and it makes me think I'm going to have a better day. You know, I listened to that piece of music this morning and instantly I was like, yes, I'm going to have a good day today. You know, it makes me smile. And it's not just that piece of music though. All the other themes in this film, I think are all perfect, and they all perfectly encapsulate the feeling of the film. I think this is a score that perfectly marries up to the visuals, to what is going on in this film. You can just listen to the score and you can listen to the score by itself and you remember moments in the film whilst listening to the score. I have done that plenty of times. That's how I feel about many of John Williams' scores, and that's how I feel about the scores to the Lord of the Rings films, and that's how I feel about the score to Curse of the Were-Rabbit. I can listen to a piece of music, whether it's a dogfight piece of music, whether it's the theme for when you see the bunny rabbit going into bunny heaven, in the film. If you've seen Curse of the Rabbit, you'll know what scene I'm talking about. Or at least hopefully you do. You know, that's the theme that plays where you see the bunny going into bunny heaven. Whenever I listen to that piece of music, it takes me back to Curse of the Rabbit. And so does the main theme for this film. You know, whenever I listen to that piece of music, it takes me back to this film, and I think it's just perfect. And the way it marries up to the film itself is even perfecter. I know it's not a word, but it's a word I've invented for this podcast today. And the reason I brought up the Star Wars films just then, the original Star Wars film, should I say, and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, when I was talking about the musical score, is because I would say this is one of my favourite films of all time. And the reason being is because, as I've already mentioned, it is engaging, it's compelling, and it's also exciting, it's thrilling, and it has moments of horror in there which actually make you feel a bit unsettled, as the best horror films do. I'm not saying this is one of the best horror films of all time or anything, I'm not saying that, but it does have moments of horror in there which work really well. And it's also laugh out loud hilarious, which many films nowadays aren't, but this film is so funny and makes me laugh every time I've seen it. I've seen it about 60 million times now, and it still makes me laugh. I watch it twice a year because it has all those ingredients you want from a film, you know? And that's why I think it's one of my favourite films of all time, and it's also one of my favourite films of all time because it's a perfect family adventure film. It's one of those films that is perfect for the family to sit around and watch at Halloween, and everybody gets something out of it. You know, you can't do that with even the best horror films. Like, one of my favourite horror films, in fact, my favourite horror film of all time, is John Carpenter's The Thing. You can't sit down, though, and watch that with kids in the room, because it's quite scary. I actually get scared about that now, and I'm at a much older age than when I watched Curse of the Were-Rabbit. So you can't do that with a family. But with a family, together, you can all sit down and watch Curse of the Were-Rabbit, and I really think everybody will get something out of it. I think there is plenty to enjoy for people of all ages with these films. I sound like I'm advertising the film. You know, buy Curse of the Were-Rabbit on DVD. There's plenty for people of all ages. But it's the truth. It really is the truth. You can watch this at the age I'm at. You can watch as much younger than I am, or you can watch as much older than I am. And, you know, I've been watching this from my dad, and I watched them with my mum not too long ago. And I remember how much they enjoyed it. You know, my mum, I watched this film with her the other month, and she was just loving it. And then when I was watching it earlier today, she came in my bedroom whilst I had it on, and she was actually annoyed that I didn't ask her to watch the film with me. That's how much she still likes it. And even my brothers, who are much older than me, they still think the film is great. And so you understand the point I'm making. I do think that this is a perfect family adventure film. I really think it is, and I think Aardman have a knack for making them. I think they've got a knack for making perfect family adventure films. And I've already mentioned why I think it's a perfect family adventure film, but some of the other things I haven't mentioned. I mean, I've been going on way too long already. Let's say how long I've been going on for. Blimey, we've almost been going on for 45 minutes. But there's other things I want to mention, like the fact that there is setup in this film that is great, and the payoff, though, is phenomenal. Things that you don't think are going to have payoff in this film do. Like the fact that you see early in the film, you see Gromit, you know, catering, looking after his prized huge marrow vegetable, and you don't really think that's going to go anywhere. And then at the end of the film, Lady Tottingham gives Gromit the award for best vegetable of the year or something. You know, it's just set up and pay off like that, which works so well. And then early on in the film, when you first meet Lady Tottingham and she asks Wallace and Gromit to, you know, get all the rabbits off off of her lawn, and she says, off of her estate, should I say, and she says, "Oh, I would keep them all, but the vegetable competition is coming up, and these rabbits, they love vegetables." She says something like that. I'm paraphrasing badly, but she says something like that, and then later, at the very end of the film, you see that Lady Tottenham has transformed her estate into a bunny sanctuary. I mean, set up and payoff that you didn't even realise you needed. And there's so much more of that. And, I mean, I absolutely love, and I mean this 1,000%. I love the character of Huch to pieces. That character is genius. He's so good. And I love how that character's introduced, again, reinforcing the horror aspect of the film. It's introduced to... The way that character's introduced, you don't actually see him, and, you know, one of the main things about horror is what you don't see is actually scarier than what you do see, and you don't see that character in his introduction, so you think he is going to be the were-rabbit, and then when you first meet Huch, he's just a huge rabbit that doesn't like vegetables, and is basically just Wallace, but as a rabbit, and I love that character so much, and I was so obsessed with that character growing up. I was obsessed with that character so much, to the point that I have a cuddly toy Huch, which is still in my room somewhere, or God knows where, but I have a cuddly toy Huch somewhere in my room. I used to take that cuddly toy everywhere. I have so many memories of taking Huch to all these different places that I would go and visit, and he'd just be tucked in my arms, because I loved that cuddly toy so much, because I loved that character so much. I don't know why, but Huch strikes a note with me where I instantly just feel affection for him. You know, I don't know why, but I do. And I also love the voice casting in this film. You know, you have Peter Sellers returning to voice Wallace, as he does in all the Wallace and Gromit films, and he does a great job here. You know, I think this is probably the best voice performance it gives as Wallace. And you also have Helena Bonham Carter as Lady Tottenham, which I think is actually very, very good casting, because Helena Bonham Carter she does a lot of these family horror films, if you will. You know, she's been in a lot of Tim Burton films, and they are family horror films when you think about it. The likes of Sweeney Todd, the likes of the Alice in Wonderland remake, which I didn't really like, but she was in that. There's another one, Big Fish. I thought Big Fish isn't really a family horror film, but you get the point of making. She's been in a lot of Tim Burton films, where she's played Bellatrix Lestrange. I haven't seen the Harry Potter films in a while, but she played Bellatrix Lestrange in the Harry Potter films, and I think her casting works really well, because this is a comedy horror film. Curse of the Were-Rabbit is a comedy horror film, and I think her casting fits into that category nicely, and I think she's great as Lady Tottenham. In fact, I didn't even know it was her until I looked at the voice cast a couple of years ago for the first time. I was like, that's Helena Bonham Carter? Wow. You know, because I don't pay attention to the opening credits of a film, apparently. Anyway, and then you also have Ralph Fiennes as Victor, the villain of the film, because on the surface you think the villain is going to be the were-rabbit, then it turns out the were-rabbit's the protagonist, so the villain, the main antagonist, is actually Victor, and Ralph Fiennes, which many people might know as Voldemort in the Harry Potter films, but he's been in so much else. You know, he voices Victor, and you can tell just through the voice acting that Ralph Fiennes is having the time of his life voicing Victor. I mean, I don't know that for certain, but just through the voice acting, now, you don't get this with a lot of voice acting. I can't think of many instances like this, but just through the voice acting, you can tell that Ralph Fiennes is loving every second of voicing Victor in Curse of the Were-Rabbit. You can tell that. And Victor is one of those characters that you love to hate. You know, you feel he's gonna do it, and then he's gonna get his way, but then Wallace and Gromit save the day. And yeah, I really enjoy watching the Victor character. I've already spoken a bit about Peter Kay. I think Peter Kay as a voice of the Policeman is very funny and a very good casting too. And I love that joke in the film. There's one joke when they're in the church, giving all the townspeople in the church discussing what they're going to do when what they're going to do with the rabbit, how they're going to catch the were-rabbit, and the policeman takes off his hat, and he's got a policeman hat, which is actually quite tall, and he takes off his hat, and the policeman's head is also really tall. It's got quite a long head, and it's a really funny joke, far funnier than I'm making it out to be, and I love how tight the film is. This is a 90-minute film that is so tight and to the point. Can't believe I haven't mentioned that yet. Or I might have mentioned it, but I've been going for so long that I've forgotten now. I can't believe how tight and to the point this film is. There is not a dull moment, Even in some 90-minute films nowadays, you get some moments which do slow down a bit in places. You don't get that with Curse of the Were-Rabbit. It is constantly moving and to the point, and yes, there are a lot of fast-paced sequences, sure, but there's also some breathing space where you get to spend time with these characters. Like when Wallace realises he is the Were-Rabbit, and you see him with Gromit and with Huch, and he's realised that he's not the same person he was because he's thinking like a rabbit now, and you do get those breathing spaces and those moments when you get to spend time with the characters in this film, but then it's also constantly moving. It never has a dull moment, unlike some 3.5-hour films I've seen recently. But that's another topic for another day. But like I was saying before, it's a 90-minute film which is paced perfectly, has breathing space, but also it's paced at such a pace that you never get bored of what's going on. Honestly, it just flies by. I stuck on the film, as I already mentioned, thought I was going to watch it for, half an hour, ended up watching the full film. Even the credits. I love how in the end credits of the film, you get all of these bunnies floating around the end credits. And at the very end of the end credits of Curse of the Were-Rabbit, how many times am I going to say the title of this film in the podcast today? But no, at the very end of the titles with Curse of the Were-Rabbit, you get that rabbit screaming out. And it's just perfect. It's just perfect, and it's so well written. The script is so sharp and to the point, it's witty, and the visual gags are so funny, and it has those action sequences which leap off the screen in the best way possible, and actually exciting and thrilling, and it does lean into that horror in the way this film should, and it's a comedy horror film, unlike some comedy horror films we've had recently, which is actually funny and makes you laugh and actually is a bit scary in parts, and it's a perfect family adventure film, and it's just, it's perfect overall. And you get why I think that. I've been going on about this film for approaching an hour now. I've been going on about this film for forever, because I just love it so much. When I love something, I get really into talking about it, and I love this film to pieces. It is just so good. And I love it. I love it to pieces. It's one of my all-time favourite films, and it still holds up now. Even though this film was released all the way back in 2005, it still holds up now. It's still, you can watch the film and you'd think it was made yesterday. I still think it looks brilliant. Just the way it looks. Not only the animation and not only in the visuals, but also just in the way that it all still holds up. I'm not even sure what I'm saying anymore because it's been going on for so long. But you get the point. I absolutely love Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. And I think it's the best thing Wallace and Gromit, period. And I also think it's a masterpiece. And I also think it's just complete perfection. And so, for me, that is why I'm going to give this film, I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10. It's one of my favourite films of all time, as I already mentioned. It isn't my favourite film of all time because I don't quite have the same affection for this as I do for Empire Strikes Back and Indiana Jones and Last Crusade, and maybe even Hot Fuzz as well, which is another comedy horror film. Very different than this. Very different than this film. But I don't quite have the same affection for Curse of the Were-Rabbit as I do for some of my other all-time favourite films. But I still have this affection for this film that I don't think will ever go away. As already mentioned, I watch this film like twice a year, at the very least, because there's something about which always draws me back to watching it. Whether it's the way it's written, whether it's just these characters, whether it's the way it looks, whether it's the feel of the film. You know, I already briefly spoke about this in my podcast that I did about Aardman Film Studios a couple of weeks ago now. I said there's something about all of Aardman's productions which feels where you watch the film and if you watch one of their films and there's this warmth that comes off one of their films. Whether it's Chicken Run, whether it's Pirates in an Adventure with Scientists, whether it's the Shaun the Sheep films, whether it's Chicken Run Dawn of the Nugget, whether it's any of the Wallace and Gromit shorts, or whether it's this film. In fact, even though I love many of the Aardman films, and even like some of their lesser ones, even so I have this great affection to almost all of Aardman films. This, to me, is the one that feels the most warmly. This is one I feel most warmly to when I think about Aardman Studios. When I think about Aardman Studios, this is the film I think about. I have so many fond memories of watching this over the years, even to the point that down here I have part of the Were-Rabbit costume I used to have when I was a kid. So for podcast listeners, I've got the paw of a Were-Rabbit costume from this film that I got from this film in my hands right now. And I used to have far more of the costume. I used to have the ears and I used to have another paw and I think I had something else to it. But I don't have that anymore. I've only got the paw. I've probably still got the rest of the costume somewhere, though God knows where in my house, because everything's just all over the place in my house right now. But I've got the rest of the costume somewhere, and I just remember dressing up as a character, as a Were-Rabbit, so many times, and I have so many memories of, so many fond memories of watching this film. I love it dearly. I really, really do, and it's just one of those films which makes me smile. You know, from the get-go, I'm smiling with this film. I'm smiling with the opening, with where it goes, with the characters, with watching Wallace and Gromit on this journey, with Huch, with Lady Totting, with all the rabbits and the way they look. I love the look of the rabbits in this film so much, with the way the animation looks, with all the excitement and the thrill and the horror and the emotion and the laughs that you get as the film goes on. I just smile from here to the point that when I was watching this film before this podcast today, my cheeks were hurting because of how much I was smiling. You get the point. I love this film so much. I think you've understood the point about half an hour ago on this podcast about how much I loved it. But yeah, I adore this film to pieces. I love it. I love it so much. I know I've said that about 5,000 times in this podcast today, but I'm gonna say it again because God, it's so good. It's so good. Absolutely adore it. And that is why I decided to talk about this film on Halloween, because I've been thinking about it a lot recently, and I was thinking, should I review a proper horror film for Halloween? Should I review a proper horror film for Halloween, like The Thing, or like Silence of the Lambs, or like Scream, or anything like that? Should I review a proper horror film? And I thought, no, let's review Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit instead, because that, for me, is a perfect Halloween film, if you will. And so, as I already said about 1,000 times, this is one of my favourite films of all time. It's a perfect film in my opinion. I love it to pieces. And that is why I'm going to say once more that Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit is an absolute masterpiece. And that's why I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10 from me. Anyway, guys, that is it for the podcast for today. I know I've been going on, and I do apologise. I've got on quite a bit in this podcast, but if you stayed listening or watching this podcast to this point, thank you so much, because it does really mean the world to me, because, yeah, sometimes I think I'm going too long on my podcast, but then if people have been staying listening to it this long, well, clearly I'm keeping people engaged somehow. At least I am in my head. Anyway, yes, that's it for the podcast today. And if you have seen Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, let me know your thoughts on it in the comment section below. And if you haven't yet, what are you doing with your life? Go and check out this film. Trust me, it will make your life about 10 million times better. Actually, maybe not 10 million times better, but it'll definitely make your life, or it'll definitely make your day a little bit more enjoyable. And I would say go and check it out on some streaming services, but as far as I'm aware, you can only get it on Prime Video for £3.6. What a weird price is that. But if you feel like paying £3.6 to watch Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit on Amazon Prime, go and do that, because I do not think you'll be disappointed whatsoever if you haven't seen the film yet. But if you have seen the film, let me know your thoughts on it in the comment section below, and let me know your thoughts on my review in the comment section below as well. And if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like and subscribe on this podcast, and look forward to many more podcasts coming very, very soon on this channel. As I already said, thank you as always for watching or listening to this podcast. And I suppose this is it. Yes, we finally got to the end. I suppose this is it. So I will see you guys again soon. But bye for now. Bye.